Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of I Never Knew But My Dog Did podcast. I am Maureen Scanlon, your host and life coach Maureen, as most of you know me. I am so thrilled this morning. I've been looking forward to this podcast for months. You have no idea. And I was telling my guest offline, someone who's extremely excited about this podcast is my husband. And I'll tell you why. My next guest, Luke Weinhagen, is a certified situational awareness instructor, a former United States Marine, founder of Core Human Competence LLC, and the creator of Dangerously Competent, a self-defense and self-sufficiency training program. Luke teaches individuals, families, and organizations to assess risk, respond swiftly, and win. He is the author of The Primal Primer and an applied theory fellow at the Natural Law Institute. I am so excited. I can't wait to talk about your book. I can't wait to talk about things that we need to know, just some basic stuff. And welcome, my friend Luke.
Thanks so much for having me on today. I appreciate it. Look forward to the
Absolutely.
conversation.
Absolutely. I'm so thrilled. So, of course, the podcast is called I Never Knew. And so it's interesting when I talk to my guests, and when you're in front of me, you're at this point. But what I like to know is how you got to this point. What made you go into this niche, which I think is brilliant? I think it's super, super important. And as I told you off air, as a crime junkie, I've become so much better at looking around me and being situationally aware. So tell us your beginning story, or as I call it, your knee moment, like those moments that you were on your knees going, what the hell do I do with my life? What happened? What just happened?
Right. But there's a series of them that led to this, so we'll try to walk through some of them. So early on, back in high school and things like that, I was really strongly interested in psychology and human behavior and things like that. Right. I mean, I was really drawn to that whole field. I went through some issues in high school. My best friend killed himself when I was in high school, and it's a traumatic experience walking through that. It's a bummer. It's really sad to lose a friend and things like that. But the response to that from the I don't know, the adults in the room really, I don't know, it didn't land on me very well. They wanted this circle of friends. They wanted to medicate away our mourning, and I was really unhappy with that as an approach.
Yeah.
And so that kind of soured me to pursuing the traditional path into psychology, or that line of studying human behavior. I didn't want to wash away people's experiences. I didn't want to minimize people's experiences. That wasn't an interest of mine. So having gone through that process, it kind of turned me off to pursuing that as a professional path. And so instead I joined the military. Right.
Yeah.
Seems like the exact opposite approach, but it was, it seemed like the right thing to do at the time. And I enjoyed the experience. But so then when I got out of the service, my wife and we weren't married at the point, but we got married after I got out of the service. Her father is one of the co-creators of the game Dungeons and Dragons. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Yes.
So he was teaching at a school in Florida. He was teaching game design at a school in Florida. So he invited me to come down and check out the school. And so I went down and took a look at the school, and while I was talking to the instructors and whatnot there, it dawned on me, or they helped share with me, that designing games is the study of human behavior and human interaction and human incentives, right? And so that's kind of that was my next step on the journey of getting to exploring these topics, right? So I ended up going to school down there and studying game design and game theory and things like that. And it really is, a game is, it turns out that a game is just an incentive engine with some sort of database or state container attached to it, right? You have a board for board games, or you have an actual database for computer games and things like that. It just holds the state, but everything else about it is just playing with human incentives and playing with human behavior. That's what they're all about, right? That's what game design is. And so I studied that for a while and did that for a while. And so I've always been pursuing this kind of notion of of human behavior. What makes us tick? What drives us? Why do we do the things we do? And how do we interact? So I went down that path for a while, and applied that in a professional career, doing some other things, but applied all the same concepts. And then I got involved with this organization called the Natural Law Institute. And my big focus there, the big thing that I work on with that group, is the study of human cooperation. How do we facilitate cooperation? How do we maintain cooperation? How do we preserve the opportunities of cooperation? And that's my actual field of study with the Natural Law Institute. That's the applied theory that I work on directly. And that had me exploring what is getting in the way of our cooperation, right? What's undermining our ability to interact with each other in positive and productive and value exchange ways, right? So I'm doing a lot of talking on that. I'm doing a lot of research on that. I'm doing a lot of writing on that. And then the pandemic hits, right? And I see I'm building a lot of this stuff on the side, but then the pandemic hits, and I see, people are terrified that they're going to lose access to grocery stores. They're terrified that they're going to lose access to, productive work. They're terrified that they're going to lose access to toilet paper, right? I mean, I see fear skyrocket, and not just fear of having to navigate a world where this threat of this virus exists, but fear of just simple sustenance. How do you maintain your own survival in a situation like this, right? And so that really it became a catalyst for me in putting all these ideas together. And this is where the book came from. It became a catalyst for me putting all these ideas together into a cohesive format and a series of developmental steps that people can use to fix that vulnerability. We're the top of the food chain. We're the apex hunters on the planet, and we're scared of not being able to have access to food. We're scared of not being able to have access to toilet paper, not being able to leave our house. We should never be in that position, regardless of how you feel about the pandemic and how we respond to the pandemic. No human being should ever be in that position, right? So I had to put all of my various research topics together into one cohesive work and put it out there. And that's what the Primal Primer came out of, was that kind of path of all of these different pieces I've been working on over the years, having to just slam them together, and people needed it now. So I had to put it together and make it a thing now. So that's where the book came from. That's when I started my real focus on putting the business together and making myself available for all the other things outside of the situational awareness. The situational awareness stuff is part of this. It's a big piece of all these things, but all the rest of the material that I work on, I had to combine them all into a package that I could provide to people. So
I love all of that. And oh my gosh, there's so much to unpack here. Everything that you said. Oh my gosh. I'm just like, I'm a sponge right now. I'm like, that makes so much sense. And I just completed my diploma in modern applied psychology. And there's a lot of these theories, the school of thought and school of social psychology. And I learned a ton of stuff about that. And I love that the evolution of where you started and where it got you. Cause I'm that person too. Like, okay, you see a news story and, oh yeah, it's really bad. There was, a murder or something. And I'm like you, and I'm like, well, I want to know why. I want to know what led up to this. Especially recently, I heard about a family annihilator, and family annihilators to me, I'm fascinated by it, because that just seems like, I think if you're taking out rage and anger on strangers, it's one thing, but I think when you're annihilating your entire family, there had to be signs, and there had to be some deep seated stuff. The pandemic, and I know it can be controversial when people hear me say this, but I think anywhere in history where there was tragedy, there was learning. And I think it was like our biggest leap to growth is when we have these tragedies. It's hard to say this is a good thing, but really, when you look at it, think of all 9/11, my goodness, look at what kind of a country we became after that, how united and how patriotic, which we should have been doing all along. But sometimes it takes these big, huge, tragedies to do that. The game design for the human incentives. I never thought of that. And you're absolutely correct. It's this winning mentality. Like, I want to win. I have an incentive to win, and I'm going to spend money to buy the game. I spend money to find codes. I'm going to interact with others to find out the secrets. And that can be applied in everyday life. So I really love that. Although the pandemic sadly took lives, I also think it, for me too, my business, it just changed everything.
Right.
To be able to really embrace video coaching and not have to do one-on-one face-to-face, it the basic survival that you talk about, you're right. We should never fear that we can't take care of ourselves, but it really shined a light on how dependent we are on our comfort zones. And
Yes.
that's what I saw in my coaching was like this fear of the unknown, and that's anxiety. And this feeling of like, what's my mortality? I could just go to the grocery store and then I could die. That's it, literally was, that extreme in people's minds. So I just think it's awesome, everything that you talk about, because I'm a psychology buff, as far as understanding why we do what we do. Do you think that a feeling of security is one of the most crucial foundations for mental health that we have?
I do. A lot of the work that I'm doing now, and I'm sure with your background, you're familiar with this, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? That's a big piece that I work with, right? And so in that hierarchy, you have your the real basic needs are at the bottom, right? The physiological needs, the food, the water, the protection from elements, is that, and then supported by that, upon that foundation is the security needs, right? The safety and security, right? And so
Yep.
that really is the point of all the work that I'm doing, is that when that foundation is compromised or non-existent, then it undermines and compromises all of your ability to meet your needs above that, right? That's the way a hierarchy works, right? There's the bottom layers support the layers above. And so
Right.
when you have a deficiency or inability or lack of competence or anything like that in facilitating those lower level needs, that's going to impact everything upstream from those needs. Right. You mentioned anxiety. In a healthy person, in a healthy expression, anxiety is a very valuable emotion. If you're blindfolded, standing in the middle of the street and you hear traffic, you should feel anxious. That's a that's a response that you ought to have to keep yourself safe, right? But
Mm.
I was just reading an article recently where anxiety, it has become the number one mental health issue across the entire West. Now, we're living in a time when access to resources has never been easier, and when actual demonstrable threats have never been lower. So why is anxiety off the charts? Why is it the number one issue that so many people that are having experiences of mental health problems? Why is that
Yeah.
the number one issue that they're talking about, the number one issue that they're facing? And it's crazy when you think about that dynamic, that we've never been in a better position, and yet people are more anxious than they've ever been. And so that's one of the big things I kind of set out to solve when I was looking at this. I think that's one of the big pieces that's undermining our ability to cooperate, is that unresolved and unaddressable anxiety, and I'm trying to find ways to address it with the material that I put out there.
Oh, I really like that, because as a life coach, I always try to teach my clients to reframe. So reframe things that you viewed as negative. So your ants, your automatic negative thoughts, reframe those into, how can this work for me, not against me? And what you're saying is anxiety is actually a protective measure if
Yeah.
you view it that way. And I really, really love that. And I'm going to use that, with my clients. And I always say to my clients anyway, or anyone, if you're nervous about something and fearful and anxious, if it's at a reasonable level, it's a good thing, because it's driving you to this next step that you haven't taken before. And I think that's really cool that you say that, because it is a protective measure. We should fear, when there's, a hot stove and we go near it, we should fear that, because it's instinctually our basic needs are protect ourselves, be safe, and not
Right.
have any harm. And I love that you talked about the hierarchy, because I literally just studied it and I was like, "Oh." So I find this. So, and I appreciate your service in the military. I was an army wife. Um, and so the military is a I love the military for their camaraderie and their community. I've never experienced anything since we were not in the military any longer. But here's something interesting, and I want to ask you. So, do you think age plays a role in our level of anxiety or safety feeling, security feeling, and or how situationally aware we are. And the reason I ask this is I moved to another country when I was 19 years old, left family, left friends, left everything. And I can't remember feeling very fearful. I remember feeling excited about the adventure. I'm currently going through a move, only moving, one state away. It's a 2-hour flight. And for some reason, my anxiety is much higher than it was when I was 19. What do you think about that?
I think age changes your relationship to your sense of consequence,
Mm.
right? When you're young, you haven't been kicked in the face a whole heck of a lot, right? And so you
Right.
don't know that kick is always waiting there, right? And the more you've gotten kicked in the face, the more you realize that kick is waiting there. And unfortunately, the truth is the kick is always there waiting for us, right? But very few of us are learning or are being taught how to navigate the world that exists when that kick is in place, right?
Yeah.
And so we live in a state of blissful ignorance for a while till we get kicked in the face, and then that ignorance is shattered, and we don't know how to cope with the shattering of that ignorance because we still don't have the skill set to then navigate a world where that risk exists. That's one of the
Yeah.
big things we have to change is we have to develop that skill set. So the world is not safe, right? We all want it to be, but the fact of the matter is the world is not safe. We're flying through space on a giant ball, spinning around a gigantic gas bomb, right? So just inherently the physics of it, the world is not safe. Meteors could smash into us at any time, right? It's just, and then we spend most of our time, moving through environments where there's, thousands of pounds of metal and rubber and chemicals screaming by us, controlled by people barely paying attention to what they're doing. Right. So I'm not even just talking about the risk of being attacked by another person or things like that. I'm talking about just our environments in general. The world is not safe. Right. And we don't like looking at that, but we don't like looking at that because we never developed the capacity to navigate the unsafe safely. And that's the big change that I'm trying to accomplish here is I don't want the people I'm interacting with and people I'm coaching, I don't want them to pretend the world is safe. I want them to carry their safety with them. I want them to know they can navigate the challenges, the threats, the risks. They can navigate any of those things just by developing the things that I'm having them develop.
I love it. I love it because at the core of everything, what has made our species survive has been adaptability and
Yes.
preparedness.
Yes.
And so I love that's the core, what you want people. We don't want to put our heads in the sand, but then we also don't want to go out there being like, oh my God, this bird's
Right.
gonna come and
Right.
kill me.
Right.
And when I ask about the age part of it, I love that you said, we haven't been kicked in the face yet. I'd call that experiential fear
Yes.
versus just exposure fear,
Yeah.
right? And what do you think? And this is something I've noticed in myself that made a difference was the less I watched, like I know there's danger out there, but the less that I was exposed to all the bad stuff, like I stopped watching the news like all
Right.
the time and I stopped, you know, reading things that just hurt my heart. And it's not that I played ignorant, but it was too much. Do you think information overload lends to bigger fear and anxiety for us?
Yeah, and I wouldn't say bigger fear and anxiety. I would say inappropriate fear and anxiety. Right. So there's a lot of demands on our attention these days, and much more so than I think we've ever experienced in the past. Is because there's so many sources drawing our attention, so many sources asking for our attention, trying to capture our attention. We have all the computers and all the flashing lights, and I mean, there's just attention grabbers are everywhere. All the advertisements everywhere we go, right? There's so much demand for our attention, and again, going back to the foundation, going back to Maslow's hierarchy stuff, right? When you don't develop that foundation from which to integrate all of these demands, your ability to regulate attention is almost zero.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's going to be different for everybody, right? Some people handle it better than others. We all have our own biases and stuff like that, right? But without that foundation, there is your ability to integrate is very compromised, right? And that's kind of what
Yeah.
I'm getting at with a lot of material that I'm talking about here. You mentioned dependence earlier. That's a big talking point in my work, is this idea of dependence. Most people, they don't recognize, they don't understand how dependent they are for having their needs met, their needs met, right? They think,
Yes.
I'm working, I have a job, I've got money in my pocket, so I can go buy the things I need. But that you're still dependent on that grocery store existing for you to be able to walk in there and trade them your money for the goods. That's not actually you being capable of pulling your needs out of your environment.
Yeah.
It's still a
Yeah.
dependency. The same thing for the water, the same thing for the safety and the security, right? We're outsourcing all of those things, right? And that
Right.
leaves us very vulnerable. That means that very base layer of Maslow's hierarchy, we may be having those needs met, but we're incapable of meeting those needs. Right.
Mm.
And I don't, have you ever been late on an assignment, even back in school days? Have you ever been, late on an assignment? Right. So when you get that when you procrastinate on something, your brain starts to worry at you, right? It starts to trickle anxiety into you, right? It's like you're behind on this, you're not going to get caught up. It starts talking at you and trying to make you uncomfortable about the fact that you're behind on the thing that you're supposed to be doing. One of the arguments that I make in the work that I do is that when we're incapable of meeting our own needs, our limbic system is doing that to us all the time. Our midbrain is doing that to us all the time. It knows that we're not capable of meeting those needs. So we're operating constantly under a state of low grade but perpetual anxiety, just because our midbrain knows that we're not that adaptive generalist anymore. We're not that human animal capable of navigating its own environment, that we've become caged by our own dependencies, right? And you look at any animal raised in captivity, its behavior changes
Yeah.
from a healthy animal in the wild, right? You start to see the inability to regulate the emotion of the animal. You start to see the inability to regulate the attention of the animal. You start to see inappropriate aggression, right? We start to see all the things we're seeing manifest in our society now,
Yeah.
because that dynamic of dependence. And that's one of the things that I'm hoping to address with people, is that I'm not suggesting or even recommending any sort of regression. I don't want to go back to living in caves and clobbering animals for every meal, right? But what I am suggesting is, in the same way that, if you don't keep yourself fit, if you don't apply those kind of pressures, if you don't go to the gym or whatever, your body starts to deteriorate, right? We need we need that proxy for nature's feedback physically, right? In that same way, we need proxies for nature's feedback for our psychology, for our emotional state, for our attention, for our perceptual health is what I call it, and for our cognitive health, things like that. We need those kind of pressures. You mentioned that those negative experiences changing how we view things. Like 9/11 and the pandemic. What those are is a reconnection with the pressure that nature would normally be being applied to us, right? Civilization is a technology that separates us from nature, so that our decisions don't kill us immediately, or our mistakes don't kill us immediately, right? So it's a
Yeah.
good thing. But
Yeah.
when we expand that separation, it gets to the point where we separate ourselves from all of those pressures, and we start to get dysfunctional, right? Because we don't have proxies. We haven't introduced or added proxies for that feedback from nature. We recognize that with the physical stuff. We recognize that with the gym. We have to work out, or our bodies start to deteriorate. We haven't done a good job of recognizing that, or introducing proxies for the perceptual fitness, the emotional fitness, the cognitive fitness, things like that. And those are where we start to see the problems nowadays. That's why anxiety is the number one mental health issue in the West. Is
Yeah.
right? We have no connection to nature's feedback to
Yeah.
sustain healthy, mental health and perceptual fitness and things like that. So that's what I'm trying to address with all this stuff.
I think that's great. I really do, because I think we all look at, mental and emotional health, and we don't realize just those basic needs being met will help our emotional and mental health. And
Yeah.
my firm belief is that self-sufficiency equals empowerment. And I know throughout my own life of excuse me, being codependent on others for my happiness and for my security, you felt like that rug could be pulled out from underneath you. And then when I decided I'm going to rely on me and only me, man, was it empowering. It was like, okay, nothing can affect me if I don't allow it to affect me. And I really like that. I have a cool story that applies to, like you said, when we didn't have all of these things, the external stuff that we needed to take care of us, basically we relied on this stuff. We did it. And it's funny, when we go through the most traumatic things in life, people say, how did you do it? And everybody's catchphrase is, I didn't have a choice, or I didn't know how strong I was until I had to be. And I think that really applies. So I saw a really neat thing the other day. There is a husky named Ghost. And I don't know if you've seen this video. And he was a puppy. He was dumped by someone, abandoned in the desert at about 8 months old. And ironically, a pack of coyotes took him in. And so they have these trail cams where they see Ghost on the camera running with these coyotes. And I think this sort of applies where Ghost would be a domesticated animal, right? And ends up being able to function and socialize in this primitive survival like the coyotes. And the fact that the coyotes took him in is amazing to me. And when you talk about humans being able to accept one another and be compatible, and we need to be more like them. Of course, I'm bringing dogs up and coyotes, because it's my thing it just resonates. So, what do you think of that scenario that we could take from Ghost and the Coyotes that will help us to function better in life based on whatever the situation is that we have to adjust to?
Sure. Yeah. So in a situation like that, the coyote pack, they're not operating from a frame of fear when they're interacting with Ghost.
Mhm.
Right. And that's one of the things that we're trying to work on with our materials, is that, the first response I get when I start teaching people situational awareness is like, I feel like I'm going to be walking around scared of the entire world now. And yeah, that's how it starts, right? Once all these threats are on your radar, that is how it starts. But as you gain competence, you start to gain confidence as well, right?
Yeah.
And the end goal of all this, once you've built the skill set, you've done the practice, you've learned the techniques, you can navigate. You start to be confident in your ability to navigate these potentially hostile environments, and all environments are potentially hostile, right? But you begin to build the confidence to know that you can navigate those hostile environments, so you don't have to engage in those environments from a frame of fear. You can then engage in those environments from a frame of relaxed readiness instead of a frame of anxiety and fear, right? And that's what we want to develop, is that frame of relaxed readiness built on a foundation of competence and confidence, right? And so that we can navigate all of these challenges that emerge. And I think that's we see that a lot in situations like that in nature, because that coyote pack, that's their environment. That environment for them is a resource, not a threat. And that's what we want to build for all of us. We want to be able to turn our environments back into resources instead of threats. But in order to do that, we have to be able to navigate those environments. We have to be able to assert ourselves on the environment instead of the environment perpetually asserting itself on us. Right. So that coyote pack has the foundation in place to do that.
Yeah. And then Ghost just came in and just sort of adapted
Right.
to what his circumstance was, regardless of being a domesticated animal. It didn't matter. He said, okay, this is my situation and I'm going to make the best of it. I love relaxed readiness. I think that's so amazing. So if my listeners are listening to you and as fascinated as I am, and they want to come to you and get some awareness, because I know a lot of people who go through trauma are like, I need to take a self-defense course. So what are some of the things what kind of steps do you help everyone to be situationally aware, and also to have that competence and confidence in self-defense?
Sure. And so the big thing I teach with situational awareness is the best way to handle any confrontation is to avoid it. Right? That's the ideal, right? And so I present the situational awareness community has this concept, and I present this concept. It's called left of bang. is the concept, right? Bang is the kinetic event. It's the bad thing that happens. It's the thing that rolls over you that creates consequences for you, right? That's the bang event. So just like we read left to right, the concept flows from left to right. Right of bang is how you react to that bad thing happening to you, right? We have to call the police. We have to, deal with the trauma. We have to, address whatever wounds occurred. I think that, anything that emerges out of the bad thing happening, right? That's right of bang. Left of bang is developing the skill set to interpret the cues that your environment and the people in your environment are giving off to alert you to the potentiality of the bang event. So what we're really trying to do is we're trying to it's a lot. It's situational awareness and behavioral analysis. It's the two things combined, right? So we're using a lot of tools and techniques to read the environment, the feel of the environment, the feel of the space, and to read the people in the environment, to pick up on cues like, is this person look like they're getting more angry? We're reading the body language. We're looking at the body language. We're evaluating the body language. Is that person moving through this space like someone that intends harm would move through the space? It's one of the things we learn and develop in this sphere of learning. And once you start developing that kind of awareness, once you start looking at your environment like that, then you're buying yourself time ahead of that kinetic event. You're buying yourself time ahead of bang, and you're getting further and further left of bang. And that's the goal here. So that if you do see that happening, you can, if appropriate, you can intervene. You can get authorities to intervene. You can get yourself and your family out of there and then read about it in the paper tomorrow. Right. I mean, that's the kind of thing that we want to be working ourselves to, because again, avoiding the bang event is a far better option than having to go through it and manage the effects of the bang event.
Yeah.
Right. Like one of the examples I use, I don't know if you saw it or not, but a while back there was a parade in Wisconsin, and it was driven through, right, by a guy in an SUV or a truck or something like that, right? If you listen to the audio and watch the video and listen to some of the audio and some of the witnesses after the fact, they heard screaming and yelling, and you can hear it in the audio, but the pitch of that screaming, yelling wasn't the excited, happy cheering you would expect at a parade. It was the pitch of panic and fear and trauma that you could hear screaming. Now, what do most people do in that situation? They get closer and they start to look for what the thing is. So they're completely ignoring these signals that they're already receiving from their environment, right? And they could be, instead, if they had the skill set, they could recognize that those signals are an anomaly in this environment. They're a deviation from the baseline of this environment. And because they recognize that those are an anomaly, they could right then start taking action and grab your kids and start moving away from the source of the anomaly, the source of the potential threat, instead of trying to figure out what it is, or worse yet, what we've been conditioned to do is dismiss those signals from our environment. Oh, it's probably nothing. It's the car backfiring. They're excited about something, or we're conditioned, we're trained to dismiss all of these anomalies, all of these changes in our environment, all these changes in people's behavior, all of these changes in body language. We're told not to judge people by how they look and things like that. We're literally trained away from correctly interpreting the signals that our environments are giving us. Right.
Oh my gosh.
That leads us directly into the path of threat. That leads us into that bang event rolling over the top of us. And then we're in reaction mode rather than response mode. Right. We're at the mercy of that event, and we have to figure out how to navigate the trauma afterwards. Whereas we could have, if we paid attention to our environment, picked up on the cues, listened to the cues, believed them, didn't dismiss them and discard them, we could have gotten ourselves and our loved ones away from that threat before it even happened, and then help everybody else that didn't do that.
Yeah. I love that, because you listen to if you ever in law enforcement, and I worked in a trauma center, I worked in an ER trauma center, and it's interesting when you listen even just law enforcement podcasts, when they interview witnesses, 90% of the time when they hear a gunshot, they'll say, I thought it was fireworks. And It didn't matter what time of year it was. Everybody thinks there's fireworks just going off on September 22nd. You know what I mean? Like, it's not even close to 4th of July or New Year's. And I love that you said that we tend to diminish the dangers. We tend to condition the situation to what makes us feel better. And I think we do that physically and we do that mentally. It's like,
Yes.
and you said we basically been programmed that way, and it jogged my mind where my mother would say, don't jump to conclusions, don't get your panties in a wad, like
Right.
all of those insertions of things where people are like, quit being so dramatic, don't
Right.
be a drama queen. You're right. We've programmed everyone to just chill out and wait. And
Right.
and I love if you if you interpret the cues, like what's it going to hurt you if you are overly cautious versus under cautious.
Right.
And it really, you just called me out because I'm that person. I'm like, it's no big deal, just chill out, whatever, we'll find out, we'll figure out what's going on. And then, like you said, it could be too late.
Right.
And I myself have been like that with my kids. I'd be like, just don't overreact. That's what people say is,
Right.
why do you don't overreact, don't be so dramatic. So I love that you're going to reprogram our brains to be left of the bang, which is interpreting cues. Now, that's physical, like you said, body language, sights and sounds. Being that I'm an intuitive and I'm also a medium, I go a lot with my gut.
Mhm.
What do you think? How important do you think that is? Because I've also heard people say, I just had a feeling my son was in danger, or I just
Yep.
had a feeling something was going to happen. And we can't justify it tangibly, but we know something's off. How
Right.
do we balance what we're seeing versus that intuitive like feeling? What do you think we
Right.
could do better?
So one of the things that happens as you start developing the situational awareness training and skill set is what you're really doing is you're training your gut so that you can trust your gut more.
Mm,
Right.
nice.
We evolved all of these intuitions. Right. They kept us safe in a world that at the time we couldn't pretend wasn't surrounded by threats. Right. You hear the twig snap. You got to look and see if the tiger's there. Right. I mean, we evolved. The ones of us that survived, our ancestors that survived, did so because they paid attention to those cues and signals from their environment. Right. It's a very deeply evolved feature of being human, right? And it's essential to keeping us alive, right? So downplaying it really compromises us, really undermines us, and it's no surprise at all to me that we see the dysfunctions emerging that we see this emerging nowadays because of our compromise of these of our intuition, of our gut. So what we want to do is we want to turn that into a tool. We want to leverage that because our one of the reasons I call it perceptual fitness is because we're training it to work even better. We're training ourselves to interact with it even more efficiently, right? Our brain, our limbic system, our midbrain, it's picking up on cues our conscious mind isn't even aware of. It's picking up on body language that our conscious mind's not even aware of, right? We just can't process that much information cognitively, but our limbic system can. Our amygdala is processing all of these things, looking for threats and stuff like that, right? So it's reading all of our environment all the time. Right. And so what we want to be able to do is at first, when we start practicing this stuff, we're going to be overreacting. Right. But over time, as we practice it intentionally, as we develop the skill of intuition, as we develop the skill of reading your gut or paying attention to your gut, what we start to do is we start to, instead of overreact, we start to appropriately react instead of dismissing reaction altogether. Right. And instead of overreacting, we build the competence to appropriately react. Because a lot of these things should be reacted to.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we don't want to just train ourselves to not react. And that's one of the big elements that I work on and spend a lot of time is we want to be biasing all of these things towards action, towards taking action. When you like with the story I was telling about the parade, when you recognize the anomaly, take action. Right. We want to get to a point where we're making that 70% decision, right or wrong, instead of waiting for that 100% certainty decision. Right. We want to be biasing ourselves towards action. And I think that really makes the distinction between the healthy expression of some of these, what we call negative emotions, and the unhealthy expression of what we call negative emotions. The healthy expression triggers action. If you're feeling that anxiety and it's triggering you to make a choice, to make a decision, to take an action, then that's a healthy expression of anxiety. Same thing with fear. We have this fight, flight, freeze response for a reason. If that fear is triggering an action, if it's triggering you into fight, flight, or freeze, that's a healthy response. That's a healthy interpretation of those signals. and you're going to get better and better at it the more you utilize it, right? But where we let it, not where we dismiss it or we don't go let it trigger interaction, we find ourselves in, for fear, for example, we find ourselves in dread or panic, and those are not action states. Those are the projection of fear onto past experience or the projection of fear onto potential future experiences. Neither one of those are action biases, right? So those are not going to be healthy expressions of fear. That's not the emotion triggering a response to a signal from our environment, which is what we want our emotions to do. We want our emotions to trigger a response to the signals from our environment, which is a bias towards action. So.
Yeah. And when you say, it's a tool, it's like a workout for your brain. And one of the things that I've always told my clients, especially my younger women clients,
Mhm.
who, and even my daughters, who tend to be very distracted with their phones or
Yes.
with things that are going on. And I gave them a little exercise, and you can tell me if you think this is a good idea. Don't tell me if it's not a good idea, because I've already said it, but it's I would say to them, on the way from your car to the front of a store, I want you to recall, when you get to the front of the store, I want you to recall the people you encountered. How many red cars did you see? What kind of noises did you hear? Because I want them to start practicing, first of all, being a witness to a crime. People don't rely on it. That's why forensics is so big now, because we just can't rely on human brains. But I wanted them to just sort of get in that practice of, what did I see? What did I hear? And they're going to put that phone away, because they're going to have to start practicing
Yes.
looking around at what's going on. What do you think about using that as a way to train your brain?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a fantastic exercise to do, and everybody should be doing things like that, right? I think we need to be connected to the environments that we move through. Otherwise, it's going to be impossible for us to bring our safety with us through that environment.
Yeah.
Right? We can't carry the safety with us if we don't take the safety out of the car, right?
Yeah,
Even
right.
we're
Put
plugged
in
in
your
to our
put in
phone,
your
right?
purse, right? Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, I think it's a huge value that you're providing for your kids, to have them doing that. I have some younger kids as well as a couple older kids, and one of the games we play frequently is I Spy, but we're not looking for something red. We're looking for very specific things, so they have to really engage with their environment, right? I'm looking for somebody wearing a red shirt walking, on the left side of the street, things like that, so that they're actually looking in specific spots and trying to combine as many of the skills as possible to evaluate and address their environment. It's working with kids is fun. I like to think back, when we were going through school, how much time did we spend on things like English, right, and grammar and vocabulary and stuff like that, right? Depending on what research you look at, the studies show that somewhere between 60 and 70% of all human communication is nonverbal,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So we spend
Yep.
all this time learning all the verbal stuff. And how much time do we spend in school learning any of the nonverbal communication?
Yes.
None.
Yes.
We spend zero time explicitly learning how to read and interpret and address nonverbal communication. And so one of the things that's coming out of what you're teaching your daughters is they're looking at the people and they're reading that nonverbal communication, whether they're doing it consciously or not. They're looking at how these people are interacting with the world and how they're moving through the world and what their bodies are saying and addressing. So it's a great tool to start reintroducing some practice in learning nonverbal communication. It blows my mind when I look at statistics like that, right? Because I mean, is it any surprise? Can it be any surprise to anybody that we're becoming terrible cooperators when we're not learning 60 to 70% of how we communicate with each other, when nobody's teaching that or they're learning that at
Well,
all? So,
yeah, and you think about how disconnected our younger generation
yeah.
is from, being physically in someone's presence. And this was something for me with COVID, because I was always doing one-on-ones here in my home office. And then COVID happened, and I was like, had that moment of fear where it was like, oh my gosh, I can't I can't coach. And all I did was online coaching. And I remember my mindset was I need someone in front of me so I can feel their energy. Well, I really didn't. I actually took a course on body language, which is really it's fascinating. It's just little things that you miss or pick up on. But that's the thing, I think, with social media and so much technology, they have, I think, and this is a good um last topic to hit before we go is, do you think there's a false sense of security for our younger generation because there's this safety behind the screens and they don't have to be so face to face with people, and so there it diminishes their, I think, um belief of threats or danger? Or what do you think of that?
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with that. I think you're spot on. You know, from the research I've done and the way I view things, I've seen historically speaking to today, I see a progression, right? So a few generations ago, all of the stuff that we're talking about here today was just part of life, right? Nobody had to teach it to you because it was part of your lived experience all day, every day. You know, you were using your environment as a resource. You were out there, pulling food directly out of your environment, pulling water directly out of your environment. You were navigating your environment like threats existed in it, right? So those things
Yeah,
didn't represent a state of extra anxiety to you, right? You were
right.
you just develop the skill set like we develop walking and talking as children, right? We don't have to, nobody has to teach us how to walk per se, right? We have to practice the skill and develop the skill, right? There's a transition there between
Mhm.
infancy and childhood where we learn these skills that are driven by instinct, but they're still learned skills. A lot of these things that I talk about are the same. I think there's another transition between childhood and adulthood where we would be normally learning these skills, right? How to use our environment, how to navigate the unsafe safely, all these things that we would be learning.
Yeah.
Now we hit things like the Industrial Revolution, and it creates this momentum, it creates this gap where some of that stuff starts getting offloaded. So it's not part of our lives anymore. It's not part of our daily experience anymore. And we never recognize that we stopped developing a skill in that process, right? So we just never caught that, right? We the needs kept being met as we went through. So we hit like the Industrial Revolution, and things get easier and easier. We have machines doing all this work for us, replacing all of our own efforts, and we're disconnected from that daily lived experience of just learning these things. And we're the screen stuff is a modern or current iteration of that, is right. It's taking that to the next extreme. So, and there's of course there's been disruptions in that process. You have things like the Great Depression and stuff after the Industrial Revolution, where we're forced back into living like we're part of an environment, right? which we just always should be. But
Yeah.
so there's disruptions. It's not a continuous transition, but you can see over time we get further and further away from this feedback from nature, from our connection with how we move through environments and stuff like that. And as we do that, as things get easier, easier and more and we get more comfortable, our dysfunction starts cranking up and cranking up and cranking up and getting worse and worse and manifesting in more and more ways and more places and in younger and younger
Yeah.
people, right? And
Yeah.
so really it's just it's this transition of separation from the pressure that is required for just us to optimize our own existence, right?
Yeah. And I think we're also, I think we're losing the will and the want to do
Yeah,
the survival part. And I would say this because I've just taken my grandson, and he's been with us for over a year now, and we have guardianship, and he's 15. And
right.
so, I raised my kids, I have adult kids, and now I'm taking care of this, of my grandson at 15. And it's so funny because I'm like, well, you got a few more years, you got about 3 more years, and you're out on your own. And he's like, what? 18? So I look it up. The statistics are 48% of 25-year-olds and younger, or, like age range of 18 to 25, 48% of them still live at home and intend to live at home,
Right.
because one of them actually said, why would I go out there and have to work to survive when I can have a home cooked meal from mom, and the money that I make from work I can use for just enjoying life?
Mhm.
And that was like, oh. a gut punch to me because I thought I couldn't wait to get the heck out of my house at
Right.
18. I was out of there at 18 years old. Um, so that was interesting to me. And when you say this transition from childhood to adulthood, I have to laugh because you and I are similar in age. And in Arizona, it gets 115 degrees in the summer and it is hot as heck. And I don't know how I survived, but I had that whatever instinct to survive. But and I remember my mother would lock the door and we would be outside like for 8 hours. And you want water? We drink out of the hose.
Right.
We found trees like we would find. We had this favorite pomegranate tree, and we would like eat the pomegranates. And to cool off, they would irrigate the schools or whatever. We'd walk in the irrigation. So when you were saying that, I thought you're right. We were very innovative and very survival intuitive, where it was like no one's going to do this for you. And I'm concerned that now the mentality is someone's going to do this for you.
Yes, very much so. One of the comments I make on a regular basis, and I bring this up in the book as well, is that we're experiencing this phenomenon where we're extending childhood ever further into what ought to be adulthood.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
I'm not suggesting we need to grow up faster, but what I am saying is we need to recognize that there are these transition points between childhood and adulthood that represent a stage of development where we go from complete dependence to more and more self-reliance, more and more capacity to navigate the environments ourselves without that external subsidy, right?
Yeah.
We're losing a lot of that because we've created this system of external subsidy that supports us so completely that we don't even recognize the need to be capable of existing outside of that subsidy. And
Yeah.
just like if we don't exercise, we deteriorate. If we don't exercise all these other skill sets, they deteriorate.
Yeah. We
And
have
then we start
a
functions. So
right? We have a failure to launch epidemic is what I'm going to
right,
say. That's what I'm going to call it. So as we wrap up, tell us where we can find you on your either website or your books and all that. Tell us everything that we need to reach out to
sure.
you to get help with everything that
Yep.
is safety.
Yep, absolutely. So the website is corehumancompetence.com. And through that I offer some different services. My big focus is on the situational awareness side is I provide training for organizations that have public facing staff or employees or things like that, right? Because I want them to have the skill set to recognize when threats might emerge in those environments and then how to navigate those threats and things like that. So I work with schools, I work with churches, I work with businesses, anybody that has any kind of front or customer facing, public facing engagement is one that I do a lot of work with. I also do online work with individuals for the same thing, right? I offer some classes on situational awareness that individuals can take just as they like through online courses. I'm building out my library of all the other survival related stuff that I do in the book, right? I'm building out an online catalog for that as well, so people have access to. I do classes on that as well. I do classes for like homeschool groups and adult education groups and stuff like that for all of that material as well. So I'm always available to do classes on that. The book is called The Primal Primer. It's available in all bookstores, all the online bookstores. Barnes and Noble has it on their website. Amazon's a great place to get it. It's a short book. I tried really hard to get it down as small amount of material as possible, but which each element being as applicable as possible. What I really was trying to do with the book is create at least one capacity in each domain from which the reader can extrapolate from, right? So it may not
Yeah.
be the best fit in any specific situation, but it'll be a solid enough foundation for every situation that you can extrapolate from it to deal with whatever you're actually dealing with in your specific situation, right? If I was doing every specific, the manuscript would be 10,000 pages long, right?
Yeah.
Instead of a couple hundred pages. So it's really easy to digest, and I go very deep into the situational awareness stuff in the book, and as well as the other. Basically, I'm addressing the foundation of Maslow's hierarchy. I'm addressing the physiological needs and the safety needs, all of those basic human needs, and that's what I call core human competence. is
Yeah.
that those things combined with each other. And that's why the website is corehumancompetence.com, right? Because that's what I'm addressing with the material. So those are the two main places to get the stuff that I'm working on. Links to everything else that I do is on the website. Again, that's corehumancompetence.com. I'm also on Twitter. If you guys want to look for me on Twitter, it's just at Luke Weinhagen, just my name.
Perfect.
Other than that, just reach out and we can coordinate and figure out whatever you need to work on. We'll make it work. So
Perfect.
I am as soon as I find a location, I'm going to be doing live classes as well, where I have students coming in and learning. That's where I do the self-defense stuff, is all live classes. I don't do that online. So I'm looking for a location now to open up and start doing those as well. But again, that I'll be forced to do that locally.
Yes, definitely. Well, I love that, and
at least to begin with. So
I'll have all those links on your episode for sure, so everyone can go find you and find your book. And this has been just as amazing as I thought it would be, even more amazing, because I love the psychology, the stuff that we were able to collaborate on. So I just thank you so much, and I love what you're doing in the world, and I love the everyone has a different skill as a light worker, and it fascinates me, all the different niches that everyone you have a purpose, you have that ikigai, and I think it's great that I love what you're doing. And I piggyback off of your the hierarchy too. I piggyback off the other ones where I coach on the self-esteem, self-image, and self-confidence, because you can externally feel confident, but you got to make sure that you're internally feeling that confident as well, and consistently love yourself and put yourself first. So as I always wrap up my podcast, because they are always kind of heavy, I always end it on a light note, and you're going to love this, Luke. I don't know if you've heard any of the other podcasts, but I love to put people on the spot. So here's a little segment that I do as we wrap up called Take My Money. And what this little segment is I go out and I find the weirdest and craziest things that are for sale. And or if you've bought something that was weird and wacky and for sale that you can share with us. And so I give you a few seconds to think about that while I give you an example of what I found. This is so cool, because what I found was a website called thisiswhyi'mbroke.com, which that in of itself is perfect, right? I mean, hello, that name just kills me. So here's a couple of things that I found on thisiswhyi'mbroke.com. For $6,000, you can get an umbilical cord phone charger. Yes, folks, it looks like an umbilical cord, and it is $6,000. The other thing, which I think is a little bit, it's kind of cool. Do you remember when we played with Play-Doh in school and the smell of it? I think, oh, I love the smell of Play-Doh. Well, they have a grown-up sense Play-Doh set, and there is mown grass, there's mom jeans, there is Grill King, and latte. So I thought that was pretty interesting. If you had an affinity for Play-Doh as a child, now you're an adult, I'm going to give you the okay to play with this Play-Doh. And that set was only $12.32. So it's affordable, and it's nostalgic, and it'll make you happy. It'll help you. So what do you have for me, Luke, that you've seen weird, wacky, or just unusual?
Right. So I do a lot of grilling and smoking meats and stuff like that, right? It's just one of the hobbies of mine. And so I'm always keeping my eye out for, different rubs and things like that I can use on these things. And I came across a powdered ketchup.
What?
I didn't even know it was a thing, but I found a company that makes a powdered ketchup, and it blew my mind finding it. It's a company called Flavor God. Is the name of the company, and they sell all these different. They sell like basically powdered versions of hot sauces and condiments and ketchup and all this, but it was the strangest. I just powdered it's like ketchup with all the moisture removed.
Wow.
Like desiccated ketchup is the weirdest thing. So I mean, I know they have things like powdered milk and powdered eggs, but powdered ketchup, it blew my mind finding that one.
Yeah, but There's, if you need something long-term survival wise, like you need your powdered ketchup on there so you can have the flavor, but obviously a bottle of ketchup is not going to be sustainable. And I think that's really genius. Thank you. Good job. Job on that one. He did it, folks. He did it. All right, listeners, that's gonna wrap us up for today. I am so grateful for all of you that are listening. I'm so grateful for my amazing guest, Luke. And all I can say is my whole purpose and passion in this life is to build this community to help you with every single guest that comes on and gives you information you didn't have before this hour of your life. And keep building this community. Go on and do the 5-star reviews and share this with your friends and family because there's always something good here for you. Of course, you can find my books. My Dog is More Enlightened Than I Am, and My Dog is My Relationship Coach on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Outskirts Press, and all other places where you can buy books. And for any life coaching and for business coaching, relationship and dating coaching, I'm at lifecoachmaureen.com. So thank you all once again for being here. Love you all. Take care of each other. And in honor of Luke, as I always end, I'm going to say, be safe. That's going to be the key, is be safe and be situationally aware and take care of yourselves. Until next episode, thank you all and goodbye.